The evening sky was overcast, casting a pale blue hue over the sprawling city as high-rises blinked with lights from distant windows. On the edge of the urban chaos, where the corporate towers gave way to shadowy alleys and forgotten lots, a man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out of his luxury black sedan. His name was Charles Mercer, CEO of one of the country's leading tech conglomerates. Most people only knew him as the face on magazine covers and shareholder reports, smart, ruthless, unimaginably rich. Few knew the man behind the power. He wasn't supposed to be here. His GPS had malfunctioned, rerouting him through a less traveled part of the city. Frustrated but intrigued, he decided to stop by a small convenience store for directions. That's when he noticed her. A small girl, maybe 7 or 8, with tangled hair and wide brown eyes, stood barefoot near a broken street lamp. Her dress was torn and faded, her arms clutching something wrapped in a dirty towel. Her eyes met his, not with fear, but with a calmness that chilled him. She didn't run, she didn't speak, until he approached and crouched down to her level. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head. "Are you waiting for someone?" Another shake. "Where's your family?" That's when her lip quivered, and she whispered something so softly, he had to lean in. "Sir, she's too weak to beg." Confused, Charles looked down at the bundle in her arms. Whatever was wrapped inside wasn't moving. At first, he assumed it was a doll. But the weight of her words, the look in her eyes, he realized there was something more. Slowly, she unwrapped the towel. It was a dog, skin and bones, breathing shallowly, its ribs visible through its filthy fur. Its eyes blinked slowly, as if each movement was a struggle. Charles froze. He had seen pain. He had donated millions to charities. But this moment was different. This wasn't an email. This wasn't a cause in a glossy brochure. This was raw, immediate suffering, and it was real. "Where do you live?" he asked, his voice lower, almost breaking. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward an old car parked at the edge of the abandoned lot. Curious and now concerned, Charles stood up and walked toward the vehicle. It was rusted, covered in dust, and clearly hadn't moved in weeks. Still, he saw a figure, someone hunched in the backseat. He gently tapped on the window. No response. He opened the door carefully. The smell of illness and damp air filled his nostrils. Inside lay a woman, frail, gaunt, barely conscious. Her cheekbones protruded sharply, and her breathing was labored. An empty water bottle sat at her feet. His heart sank. This wasn't just a stray girl and her dying dog. This was a family on the edge of life itself. He called 911 immediately, his voice urgent but steady, and gave the location. As he waited, he noticed a small notebook on the front seat. It was full of scribbled pages, notes, sketches, records of meals missed, and small drawings by the little girl. One page stood out, a drawing of the 3 of them, girl, woman, and dog, smiling under a tree. It was titled, "Home." The ambulance came within minutes, sirens breaking the evening silence. Paramedics rushed in, and Charles stepped aside, watching as they gently lifted the woman and placed her on a stretcher. The little girl followed closely, still holding the weak dog. One medic turned to Charles. "She'll need urgent care, but she's stable for now. The child's okay, just dehydrated." "What about the dog?" Charles hesitated for a second. Then, without a word, he picked up his phone and called his personal veterinarian. An hour later, as the hospital staff took over, Charles sat in the waiting room, thinking. Something in that girl's eyes haunted him, not just sadness, but strength. She had held onto her dog through hunger, heat, and fear, never letting go. And her mother, too proud to beg, too weak to fight, had endured silently, hoping for a miracle. He thought of his own childhood. A single mother who worked 2 jobs to feed him. How they'd once shared a meal of crackers and soup because that's all they had. He had promised himself he'd never be poor again, but he had forgotten the faces of those who still were. That night, he stayed until the doctor assured him the woman would recover. The girl was asleep in a hospital bed beside her mother, curled up with a blanket someone had given her. The dog, according to his vet, was in critical condition but might survive. Charles didn't go home. He drove to his office, called an emergency board meeting, and presented a new plan. "We're launching a division," he told them, "for emergency outreach. Real-time intervention for families who fall through the cracks. No red tape, no bureaucracy. If you don't like it, resign tonight." Some thought he had lost his mind. Others respected him more than ever. But Charles didn't care what they thought. He had looked into the trunk of human suffering, and he had frozen, not out of fear, but because of what he'd almost forgotten, the value of empathy. A week later, the little girl and her mother were released into a temporary home arranged by Charles's company. The dog, now nicknamed Hope, was on the mend, wagging its tail weakly. Charles visited them often, not as a CEO, but as a man who had remembered something deeply human. He brought books for the girl, job opportunities for the mother, and even played fetch with Hope. News outlets eventually caught wind of the story, painting Charles as a hero. But he always dismissed the praise. He would say, the hero was the little girl who stayed by her dog's side. I just stopped to listen. That story became the heartbeat of his company's new vision. And across the country, thousands of families received help they would have never gotten through normal channels. It all started with a child who spoke softly, a dog too weak to beg, and a man willing to stop and see. Because sometimes, the most powerful change begins not with a plan, but with a moment. And that moment, in all its quiet heartbreak, reminded one man, and through him, the world, what it truly means to care.